Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and the world has gone silent. No traffic outside, no planes in the sky, no messages, phone calls, or emergency broadcasts. The cities are still standing. Food is still sitting on supermarket shelves. The lights may stay on for a few more hours until the power grid begins to fail. But almost everyone is gone. Somewhere, there are other survivors. And now, the most important question is not simply, can we survive the winter? It is this. What is the smallest number of people needed to prevent humanity from disappearing forever? 1 million would almost certainly be enough. 10,000 sounds manageable. 1,000 starts to feel dangerous. 100 sounds more like the beginning of a cult than the beginning of a civilization. But could 100 people really be enough? What about 50? Or just one? At first, the problem seems simple. You need enough people of reproductive age and enough time for them to raise a new generation. Those children grow up, have children of their own, and the population expands. On a spreadsheet, humanity could recover surprisingly quickly. But the human body does not work like a spreadsheet. The first problem is genetics. Every one of us carries genetic variants that could potentially cause disease. Usually, they do not create a serious problem because we carry only one defective copy. But when two closely related people carry the same harmful variant, their child may inherit both copies. A disease that remained hidden for generations can suddenly appear. In a large population, the chance of this happening is relatively low. But in a group of only a few dozen people, everyone eventually becomes related. After several generations, fertility may decline, miscarriages may increase, and inherited diseases may become more common. So, to save humanity, you do not simply need enough people. You need enough genetic diversity. But there are really three different questions here. How many people are needed to maintain a healthy gene pool? How many are needed for a community to survive? And how many are needed to preserve civilization? Those questions do not have the same answer. Researchers have modeled isolated human communities for long-term space travel. A generation ship crossing space for hundreds of years is not very different from a group trapped on Earth after an apocalypse. Neither can recruit new people. Both must grow food, treat disease, repair machines, and create the next generation. Some models suggest that preserving both genetic health and modern civilization could require around 14,000 people, but those 14,000 cannot be random. You need doctors, engineers, farmers, electricians, water specialists, people who can deliver babies, preserve seeds, and repair machines after replacement parts stop arriving. You also need several people for every critical skill. Because if your only surgeon, your only electrical engineer, and your only water expert die in the same accident, thousands may still be alive. But civilization may have lost knowledge it cannot replace. So 14,000 people might preserve more than the species. They might preserve part of the modern world. But what if the only goal is avoiding extinction? Some models reduce the number to roughly 5,000. At that scale, the gene pool may be large enough to limit the worst effects of inbreeding. But 5,000 only works under favorable conditions. The population must include enough people of reproductive age. The ratio of men to women must be reasonably balanced. The survivors must live close enough to form a community, and they must avoid destroying themselves through war, disease, or competition for resources. 5,000 people scattered across different continents are not one population. They are several smaller groups, slowly disappearing alone. Survival does not depend only on how many people are breathing. It depends on how many can find one another, cooperate, and create the next generation. Our ancestors may once have survived with far fewer. One study estimated that around 800,000 years ago, the breeding population of our ancestors may have fallen to about 1,300 individuals. 1,300 people, fewer than the number of students in many high schools. Somehow, they survived. They found food, they raised children, and they endured disease, predators, and a hostile climate. But that does not prove 1,300 people are always enough. They may have lived in separate groups that occasionally exchanged members. They may also have preserved more genetic diversity than their small population suggests. And the fact that the species survived does not mean their lives were stable. Many children may have died. Entire family lines may have vanished. The population may have remained close to extinction for thousands of years. Evolution does not require a safe or happy society. It only requires that some people survive long enough to reproduce. If we reduce the number further, luck becomes almost as important as science. Some models suggest that a genetically diverse group of between 150 and 500 people might establish a viable population. That is roughly the number of passengers on a commercial airliner. Imagine a plane landing after the disaster. 500 passengers step outside and discover that they may be the last humans on Earth. At first, 500 sounds like a lot. But some are children. Some are past reproductive age. Some depend on medicine that will soon run out. Some cannot have children. Then a fire kills 12 people. Among them are the only doctor and the only person who knows how to operate the water system. The community has lost only a small percentage of its population, but it may have lost the most important part of its future. At this scale, every death carries more weight. An accident can erase a critical skill, a unique genetic line, or a large part of the community's reproductive capacity. And then another problem appears. Who has children with whom? If one person has too many children, a large part of the next generation may share the same parent or grandparent. If the survivors divide into rival groups and refuse to intermarry, each group becomes even smaller. So once the population falls into the hundreds, the real question is no longer, how many people remain? It becomes, who are they? And are they willing to cooperate? If the disaster could be predicted in advance, scientists might select people with unusually high genetic diversity. They could examine medical histories, sequence genomes, balance the sexes, and create reproductive plans designed to prevent close relatives from having children together. Under ideal conditions, some models suggest that as few as 98 people might be enough. 98 people, fewer than the number inside a small movie theater. But now, the problem becomes ethical. Imagine being selected because your genes are useful. Then a system tells you that the person you love is not an acceptable partner. Perhaps you do not want children, but the community needs you to have several. When the survival of the species depends on your body, do you still have the right to say no? A plan designed to save humanity could quickly become a biological prison, and even if everyone volunteered, the system would remain fragile. Some people may be infertile, some pregnancies may fail. A disease could spread, and the next generation may reject the rules created by their parents. Genes can be calculated. People are harder. But in theory, the number could fall even lower. Down to 1. A single survivor could restart humanity, but only under extraordinary conditions. That person would need to be capable of pregnancy or have access to fully automated reproductive technology. Civilization would also need to prepare in advance. A facility would need thousands of frozen embryos from genetically unrelated people, along with power, medicine, food, water, medical equipment, and replacement parts. On paper, the survivor could create a genetically diverse generation, but biology on paper is not survival in practice. That person would have to maintain the facility, operate medical equipment, produce food, prevent infections, and raise several children without another adult. What happens if the generator fails? What happens if childbirth requires surgery? What happens if the survivor breaks a leg? One small accident could end the species. And children need more than food. They need a community. One person might teach them language. But can one person preserve culture, science, history, practical knowledge? A medical library cannot perform surgery. A book about electricity cannot replace an engineer. And a hard drive containing all human knowledge becomes useless if the final computer breaks, and nobody can repair it. So the answer, one person, is only true if that person is supported by an enormous automated system. At that point, humanity is not really being rebuilt by one survivor. It is being rebuilt by the entire old civilization, compressed into one facility. So, what is the fewest number of people needed to rebuild humanity? With near-perfect preparation and technology, perhaps 1, with careful genetic selection and strict reproductive control. Perhaps fewer than 100, with randomly selected survivors, probably hundreds or thousands. And to preserve medicine, engineering, electricity, and civilization itself, perhaps tens of thousands. But no number guarantees success. Genes determine the biological limits. Knowledge determines how long the community can survive. And trust determines whether it lasts long enough to create a future. Because after the apocalypse, the hardest thing to rebuild may not be the population. It may be a society worth continuing.